Check 1, 2. Yeah, that'll come. Hey, can you do me a favor? Can you hook this up to internet? Can you turn the, oh no, it's all right, I can do it myself. Can you turn the internet on?
Can I?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I'm already on.
No, you're good, Roger. Okay, good morning, everybody. We need to turn the lights down. We got to get all this go. No, we'll leave them up. Oh, there's Abby. That's Abby.
Here's the internet. Is there a specific one?
Marriott lobby.
Oh,
don't take, no, if you're on, are you on conference? Do you need video?
I don't need anything, but this is probably not working.
No, go to the lobby. It's not that bad, actually. It's pretty good. And then, okay, so.
Hold on. I have to go through. I have to go through Chrome.
Hey, Austin, can we see what's on his screen? That's not it. On his computer screen. No, that's not. That's not what his screen looks like. Oh. Okay, never mind. Just close it. It's not worth it.
Yeah, the internet's on.
Yeah, just close it.
He has PowerPoint, so it's exporting PowerPoint for us, but you're looking at the presenter view on your computer, right?
No.
What?
Now you're saying.
Okay.
Now, how come I'm not on that view here? There it is. You know, usually it's the next. Wonder what just happened.
I don't know. You're trailing with your good thing, and it looks weird.
No.
Okay, so let me let you help him. You help him.
Help me for a second, because I don't see that next slide thing.
No, that's okay. You can go. Don't worry about it. No,
No,
stay here and help him.
Come here for a second. Why isn't it showing me that next slide?
You want to see the?
You know which one? Presentation.
Yes, you want to see that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Good morning, Austin. Last day. It's taken 4 days. They got right yet.
It's kind of awkward.
Thank you, Austin. Thank you. Very good. Very good. We need to get you remedial training on microphone selection. So anyway, I don't know what's going on over there, but just say, what's it say? Maria. Oh, by the way, this is my daughter, if anybody doesn't know that, Maria. She's actually my favorite daughter. Okay, favorite. Am I your favorite? Well, come here. Am I your favorite dad?
Oh, this thing.
I'll let you know later.
Okay, no, I don't need anything else. Love you. Okay, bye. Okay, so anyway, so I got to ask a question. Hoyri asked me, where are you? You here? Anyway, I might have gone outside.
I'm gonna make a change over there.
Anyway, on your points, okay? So the board requires 40 for the perfusionist. The nurses, every state has a different requirement, and that's confusing to me. But yeah, that's an individual thing. For the perfusionist, the board requires, excuse me, 45 total CEUs every 3-year cycle. So you're either cycle 1, cycle 2, cycle 3, and that depends on when you report your CEUs, but each year, of course, you have to report your 40 cases. But on the CEU front, of that 45, only 15 of those CEUs have to be Category 1, not all 45 of them. Now, we all just prefer to do the Category 1 because we go to a meeting, we just take the point, get the certificate, you go, and they're done. That's it. You just put it in your file. So once a year you go to, of course, this meeting, and, each year it's at least 20. So in 3 years, or maybe even 2 years, at times you've got all 45. But you don't need them all to be Category 1. So That's the whole reason
course,
we
it was
developed
fine
the
before, too.
Perf Web series, which we're going to do the same thing with nurses. We're going to have a nurse education section
You and
or
I have been
portal or
fighting
whatever
for
you
about a
call it,
decade
and
about
eventually, I
computer
think,
makes more
lead into
problems.
also physicians
This
and
one,
do, or
humans.
PAs, NPs, advanced practice people that get CMEs versus CEUs or contact hours, and do that portal as well. And so if you go on that website, we already have all of our live webinars, which are Category 1, but you must watch it live. The key about doing anything on the web is it is required you watch it live, but not unlike this meeting, I can't be the CEU police, or they don't expect me to be the CEU police. So there's no requirement to sign in, log in, or anything else like that. It's just expected you're going to watch it. Now, you do get an evaluation, but that's a different issue. And we like that back for information purposes, but it's required we send it. It's not required you send it back. So it's just the board's rules.
Why would it?
And you get your certificate. So with that said, if you go on our Perf website, it'll link you, when it says watch webinar now, it'll link you to our YouTube channel, subscribe to that. But all of the presentations that are in there have at one time been approved for Category 1 CEUs. And so they're now Category 3. So you could do 15 Category 1,
Here now?
30 Category
Don't touch it anymore.
3, and you have your 45 CEU requirement in your 3-year cycle, which all of the videos that are on there are free. They're free to watch. It's free to watch all of the Perf Webs live, call in. We try to make it like a television, radio program, whatever, so you can call in and be interactive with whomever the speaker is at that time. But it all stays on YouTube and can be watched at any time at your leisure. So, but if you do it that way, I mean, we're all professionals, we all understand the rules. The rules are if you don't watch it live, you can't claim it as a Category 1 credit. Now, with that said, to get the certificate from us, that's when there's a cost. So it's like $10 a CEU or something like that. And we do short programs basically on the weekends sometimes, but mostly during the week, Tuesdays and Thursdays from 6 to 8 Pacific or Central Time Zone, and that way hopefully it's more convenient for everybody. So that's the whole concept of it. It's perfweb.us. If you have any interest in taking a look. For the nurses in here, I'll probably send you one of those advert flyers that I do off of the mailing list, and you'll see it when we get the nursing one up and take it from there. But them's the rules. And so, you know, when you think to yourself, oh my God, I'm short 5 credits, and that's all you need. If you want them to be Category 1 and you want to enjoy something that's maybe new and you see it on a webinar and you want to watch it, you do that, but you have to pay for the certificate. But if you only need 5 Category 3, you just have to go to our YouTube channel, watch any of those videos. They're all Category. Roger has done an incredible job with our library so that it's very easy to see what videos are there, what topic, what subject, what speaker, whatever it may be, and then you can just watch any of those, and it doesn't cost you anything. It's free, and you just have to write to the board, you know, on your reporting thing, what you watched, when you watched it, you know, the title and what the resource was, and it goes in and you're done. So it's a good way to save money and get, I think, you know, really quality presentation. So that's the whole point of the YouTube channel. The Perf Web series is for people who can't take time off from work, like the folks on the web here that are watching today and watch it for an entire 4 days, and they just want to do short programs throughout the year so that they can accumulate their CEUs. And also, it's a little more interactive because it's in a studio. There's not as many, so you can actually phone in and be live on the air. So that's what we're trying to do, is create that kind of community. So if you have an interest, go on those sites, take a look at it, and join up and all that kind of stuff. So we've all met Dr. Blitz once before. We know who he is, and he's going to give his 2 talks. This is it. This is all we have today. And he's going to give us 2 talks. He's doing it out of order because he knows that upsets me. And he's also going to be who puts his hand in the cookie jar to pull out, or the bag, the cookie bag, whatever it is, to pull out the winner, the name, the ticket, that if you have the corresponding raffle ticket number, you win that hotel accommodation at that great place in Vancouver. So with that said, round of applause quickly for Dr. Blitz.
Good morning, all of you. I'm very impressed of the number of people here on Saturday morning in the French Quarter. In any event, I am flipping. The time allotted is going to be the same. So this one will be 30-minute talk. The next one will be an hour-long talk, and we'll have some discussion afterwards. So the title of my talk is Healthcare Reform in 2018, and I've added the subtitle, What to Do with the Gordian Knot. If you don't know what a Gordian knot is, you're about to find out. So this is a painting from the 18th century. Anyone by any chance know what it is? Aficionados? Okay. It's called Alexander the Great and the Gordian Knot by Panini in about 1718, 1719. And what it shows here is this is Alexander the Great. He is standing in front of a chariot type device, and it's knotted to this pole. You can't really tell. All right, well, what's the significance of that? The phrase Gordian knot came from mythology, and it was about what predicted what Alexander the Great would become. The Phrygians, who are in a place that was part of Turkey, at one point in time had no king. An oracle decreed that the next man, always oracles were completely random. They said the next person who comes into the city driving an ox cart would be their king. Okay? So, of course, a peasant farmer named Gordius drove into town at some point thereafter with an ox cart, and he was made king. Out of gratitude, Gordius' son Midas, who is the Midas you all know about, tied the ox cart to a post near a statue of Zeus, which is obviously the statue figure here. The knot he used was made of cornel bark, which was very complex and was deliberately made impossible to untie. Once this knot was in place, the oracle made another prophecy and basically said whoever undid the knot would become the future king of all Asia. In 333 BC, Alexander the Great rode into town, and of course, he was brought to this knot, and he says, if anybody can do it, I can do it. Spent the entire day trying to untie the thing. There were no ends to it. It was all embedded. When he finally just had a random thought, he said, why don't I just cut it? He cut it, and he then conquered all of Asia. Now, I don't know why this is such an exciting story, but it did give us the phrase Gordian knot. And what a Gordian knot represents is a knot that is impossible to undo if you think within the envelope. If you go outside the envelope, you're able to take care of the knot and untie it once and for all. And I like to use that as a metaphor for where we are with healthcare reform and what the consequences are of untying or cutting this knot. There's great Alexander in a fresco conquering all of Asia. So this Gordian knot, what are we going to do with it? Number one, we could leave it alone, i.e. leave Obamacare alone. The problem with that is that issues have been surfacing, partially related to Obamacare, partially related to some of its failings. One of these important ones are if you partake, does anybody here partake in the marketplace, buys insurance independently? That's interesting. So everybody essentially gets it from their employer. Is that correct? Or their group? All right. That's not uncommon. I would have expected about 7% of the people in the audience to do that because that's what's true of our country. I do that, and I've seen these failings. And there's a lot of trouble going on depending on which state you're in. But in any event, that's one of the reasons why we can't leave things as they are right now. Doesn't tell you what you do next, but that's one of the issues with that. Like Alexander, you could take a knife to it and sever some of its vital parts. The issue is what happens to the rest of it. Finally, what I think is the right approach is to unravel pieces of it and fix them. Because the Obamacare, even though I personally, disclosure, was against it, it's now the law of the land. And a lot more people have become insured. And we're going through scary times, which I'm about to talk to you about. And I believe that instead of being piecemeal and not caring about the consequences, that's the right approach. And today I'm going to show you why I think so. The talk is going to show some of the background behind the health insurance market, also show you the timeline of events in rapid form, what happened in 2017 with all the machinations in Congress. I'm then going to talk about the approach of trying to find the ends of the knot, and that includes repeal and replace, repeal only, the executive orders. Next will be cutting the knot, and then I'll wrap up. And as I said, I have no conflicts, except I'm very conflicted in this area, all right? I'm a fiscal conservative, but I don't see a good outcome from the way things are occurring right now. When I was alluding before to what is happening with the insurance marketplace, this is an article that was published last year in the New England Journal of Medicine. And what it's showing is, as the years progressed, what was happening in this marketplace. In 2014, there was a net influx of 22% of insurers. The next year, it slowed down to 11%. Finally, in 2016, before Trump was elected, it dropped net by 35%. This is a graph of the U.S. adults, so it doesn't include the kids, who do not have health insurance at any one point in time. And you could see it after Obamacare went in place, we went from 18% or so down to around 11%. After Trump was elected, and again, I'm not making any moral judgments, I'm trying to put a timeline for you, it bumped up a little bit. And we don't know what's occurring in 2018 yet, but we think that it's bumping up rapidly. This is an overall slice in time today of the healthcare coverage in our country by percentage. The vast majority, close to half, are by the employer. Another 7% is the individual market. That's what we're just talking about. It's called non-group market, and I think that's a bad name for it, but you'll hear that phrase. Medicaid covers 19%, Medicare 14%, military VA 2%, and the uninsured are right now about 9%. The focus right now is going to be on this individual market because the changes in this market are occurring rapidly, and it has implications for all the rest of it. Some definitions. Things that we take for granted, but we need to be very clear on. Getting health insurance is basically a market solution to the market failure of uncertainty in health expenditure, right? That's easy. We all buy different types of insurance to cover us in case some relatively unlikely event occurs, but that can be catastrophic. When we talk about health insurance, we talk about an actuarially fair premium. That means, what is the fair premium that's going to cover you in case you have a problem? And it's really just the sum of what the expected payouts are from the insurance company plus their cost of administration. Does it include any profit? Underwriting is when an insurance company takes a look at all your risks and then decides what your premium is. What are the drivers of getting insurance? What makes you more or less likely to get insurance? And these are all going to make sense to you. And this is without a mandate, right? Because with a mandate, you either need to do it or pay up a penalty unless you're in an excluded population. But without a mandate, in other words, how things were before Obamacare came into place, who got insurance and why? And this goes for health as to any other. Your level of risk aversion. If you're a very nervous person, you're going to be more likely to get insurance than someone who just has savoir-faire and no care. The level of potential income loss. If an event occurs, if you have less personal wealth as opposed to one who has more, it's going to impact you much more. And therefore, you're going to be more likely to get insurance. Also, whether other insurance options are available. If you're above 65, you're lucky. You're eligible for Medicare in our country, so you're obviously not going to buy health insurance, or if you do, you're just going to buy insurance to cover your gaps. Whether you buy insurance is obviously going to be very much dependent on what your premium is going to be. Again, those who have less wealth are going to be more in trouble if the premium varies or is set at one price. Your ability to pay, which is what I've just been referring to, and your risk of needing treatment. This is the problem with being in the group that has prior medical disease and puts you at obviously much higher risk. Well, when we talk about trying to calculate, if you wanted to go around and think and make a logical decision about whether you needed insurance and how much you should pay for it, you would figure out the actuarially fair premium. And what that is just a product of the probability of your getting sick or hospitalized, say, the cost to cover that loss, how much that hospitalization is going to cost you, and what the administrative cost is to the insurance company. That's the actuarially fair premium. So, if a person has an annual risk of 1% of getting hospitalized, and if it's probably going to cost them about $100,000, and it costs the insurance company $100 to administrate your policy throughout its time, then you just do some multiplication and addition, and you find that your premium, your actuarially fair premium, would be $1,100. That's if an insurance company was a nonprofit. That's if no profits are taken into consideration. So that's just our starting point to cover costs. And obviously, like every other number, I've made it up. In reality, we have a different equation, right? We have the AFP, and we also have a profit that the insurance company is going to take. And that needs to take it into consideration. We live in America. Insurance companies exist because they make money. And part of Obamacare, that I'm not going to talk much about, limited that profit of the insurance companies. There was an 80-20 rule or an 85-15 rule depending on whether you were catering to larger companies or smaller companies, that said that 80% of the premium money you take in, you've got to spend on your customers. So in other words, you're limited, capped at 15%. Anything over 15% goes back to the consumers. A couple more definitions. These are probably the three most important terms of the entire lecture. Individual mandate, community rating, and guaranteed issue. All right? And they're inextricably intertwined. And if one wants to understand what's going on in healthcare, this is the centerpiece. The individual mandate says everyone must have insurance, or else you pay a price. to the government. Community rating means that everybody more or less pays the same premium. And it's based on the overall health of the community. It doesn't mean that there can be a couple of separations. Within Obamacare, it's justifiable to have a couple of separations, like smoker versus non-smoker, young versus older, okay? But there's very few exceptions. And within that group, everybody gets the same price. The third thing is the guaranteed issue. Whoever wants insurance gets it. It works only if these things are together. And you'll see why in a moment. In a perfect market, when we talk about capitalism, when we talk about competition, and we don't have a mandate, in other words, what more or less was going on to a degree before Obamacare, the question is, why does that not work? Why does it not work that, you know, when we price, if we want a certain toy, nowadays, the marketplace is much more competitive than they ever were. Why? Amazon and the online buying sites. You get information very quickly. When I was young, you had to go store to store or look at circulars to know what the relative prices were. So in a perfect market, everybody knows all the prices, all right? And you have accuracy of information. And the model does not work in health insurance because there's the middleman involved and some of the problems that come with having this third-party middleman. And when it doesn't work, we call these things market failures. The market failures we worry about with health insurance are things called adverse selection. I'm going to go a little bit into these items. Moral hazard and diseconomies of scale. Make it simple. Adverse selection means if you offer everybody a similar price and the would-be patient, the consumer, knows about their disease state more than the insurer, that disparity in knowledge causes problems, because what will happen is if there's a certain price for that insurance, you're going to think I'm either likely or unlikely to come down with the disease, the hospitalization, and you're going to make judgments accordingly. If everybody gets the same price, the ones who are sicker, I'm going to jump at the chance of getting the insurance provided the price is reasonable and that they have enough money. The ones who are more healthy, the young invincibles, we call them, don't buy insurance. And what's the problem there? The problem is that the insurance is highly dependent on the participation of the young. They're the ones that dilute out the premiums so they can be kept low. But if all of a sudden all the healthy people are not buying insurance, insurance premiums go up and becomes less and less affordable to more and more people. And ultimately, adverse selection leads to a death spiral, which I'm going to show you. It sounds much more exciting than it is. Economists like to get sexy names for things because it's the only way to make the subject matter exciting. Moral hazard, another exciting name, moral hazard. It sounds like somebody's out, drank too much, and is running around doing all sorts of evil things at night. But it's not that. What it means is that if you're not paying for your insurance and you're insured, you're more likely to seek health care and you're more likely to seek more of health care. In other words, it doesn't matter to you. If a cardiologist recommends getting a cath, sure, if you think that I need it, you're not even thinking about price, all right, in a perfect market, okay? And the problem with that is, obviously, the problem with America in general is the overconsumption of health care. All right? The reason why some cities have 2 to 3 times 50 times the cath rate of other cities, right? Finally, diseconomies of scale. The insurer makes money because the more people they have in their pool, the better. But some of the companies have become so big that it's very hard for them to keep administrative costs down. And when those go up, right, the equation, administrative costs go up, premiums go up. So there's a lot of inefficiencies and inequities that occur. All right. For some reason, the slide didn't change. All right, let's try it again. There we go. What happens with adverse selection? So you have the healthier that don't think they need insurance and the sicker that desperately need it. Well, here's what happens. To set you up, I just made up health grades. If you were to grade people in health, I could have done ABC. 4+ is perfect, 3+ is excellent health, and so on. Okay. If you have none of this is just little short headings for the mandate and the guaranteed rates. Don't worry about that, right? We're talking about a perfect market. The sick are going to buy health insurance, those guys with zero health. The 4+, who are in excellent health, are not going to buy it. The cost to insure goes up because now they got more zero than they have 4+. Premiums go up. Now the 3+ don't want to buy because the price is too high for their estimation of what their risk is, and so forth. And this spirals. This is the death spiral, till eventually it fails. Costs become too high for everybody, and people get outpriced in the market. You're all going to enjoy this lecture. You're all going to rate it very high, higher than Joe's top score. All right. So we talked about health insurance in general. We talked about why people get health insurance. We talked about why there's some problems with health insurance in terms of control over the process. And now we're going to talk about the insurer's answer to those problems. And what you'll see is both the initial problems and the answer create the situation which led to the Obamacare and the need for it. Insurers started cost sharing with the consumer, right? That we all know. Co-pays, co-insurance, deductibles, etc. What it really did is made the consumer have some skin in the game. However, out-of-pocket maximums were created so that the consumer was protected at the end of the year. However, then the insurers came back and said, we're going to limit the coverage. So that cost sharing has a double-edged sword, which we all know. Yes, we wanted to prevent unnecessary care, but for many who do not have the money, it'll prevent necessary care. People who can't afford the co-pay, co-insurance, deductible, etc. Underwriting to minimize adverse selection. So basically, all underwriting means is you tailor your price to the risk. You get the questionnaires, the consumer fills it out, the insurance company then comes back with a price, or may tell you they can't insure you. And if you lie and the insurer can prove it, guess what? You get no payouts. So, in the end, where we got is we needed protections for the consumer because all these things were bad. And the people who are getting hurt the most are the consumers. The insurers are protecting themselves. They're raising their prices. The bigger ones are outpricing the smaller ones. And you have some havoc. There's a lot poor people who did not meet Medicaid requirements, which were very stringent, couldn't get the care they needed. So we had Obamacare. And what Obamacare did, among many things, is that it prohibited the pre-existing condition exclusion, and an insurer could not turn down anyone. And that's called the guaranteed issue, which we referred to before. They also made a list or prescribed to the states. Each state had to come up with essential health benefits. And the federal government listed some that were unequivocal, the states had to have, and the remainder of the states could do. So the insurer within the market couldn't take things out to lower the price of the insurance. And those were called the essential benefits. Risk equalization is the community rating. Basically, everybody pays the same price in that community. This is summarizing where we are. The market failures, the insurance company protections, defenses, and then the consumer protections. Well, what could go wrong? Will a private insurance system survive if you don't make everyone buy insurance, the individual mandate, but you keep insurers from underwriting or refusing customers? This is one of the suggestions, and one of the things that the Congress and the President are kind of pushing toward, all right? Getting rid of the individual mandate, but telling insurers within the marketplace they got to keep to the other stuff. And the problem is that is a fail. Because what will happen is, again, the same problem we were trying to solve in the first place. People aren't going to purchase insurance. The low-risk ones aren't going to get insurance. And then the high-risk ones are. Prices are going to go up. Not going to go into this in detail. It just looks at all of the scenarios if you take away the individual mandate. And either you include the community rating or exclude it, or the group, I'm missing my word. Anyway, I'll figure it out in a second. But regardless, the different varieties of protections, all of them fail for a variety of reasons. So, with that setup, we get to the timeline of what has been going on in the last 2 years. The ACA was passed in 2010. Then we went through a whole bunch of stuff in 2017, which I'm going to get a little bit into the nitty-gritty because I think it's important to understand where we are right now. We had a failed attempt at repeal and replace. We then had a failed attempt in Congress of repeal alone. We had some executive orders that were meant to undermine the Affordable Care Act. One order was placed before Congress could have a chance to do anything, one after Congress failed. Finally, at the very end of 2017, Congress passed and the President signed the famous tax bill. And included in that tax bill was an effective repeal of the individual mandate, and I'll show you why. Now this year, what's cooking? What's the big news? That if you haven't heard about it, is there's a big lawsuit going on. Started with Texas, but now there's multiple states, 20 states, attorneys general, governors, that are suing the U.S. government saying, you know what? No individual mandate, the whole ACA collapses and the whole thing should be unconstitutional. And that is going through our courts right now. I'm not going to read all these. Anybody who wants the slide can send me an email. But it's a more detailed summary of all the stuff that went on in 2017. All the stuff. Amendments, this, that, what they were. The Republican Congress, the House of Reps finally passed something. Senate said, no, we want our own. Senate has a very slim margin. McCain got sick. Everything the Republicans tried failed. A lot of it, they were trying to cater to the ones who really didn't want the individual mandate, wanted essentially a complete repeal of Obamacare. And so they kept having to up the ante Finally, when they upped the ante and made it more a repeal, then the moderates dropped out. So everything failed, all right? And then what happens is they passed the Tax Act. They were able to pass the Tax Act with just the simple majorities. And in that Tax Act, even though it had a lot of breaks for individuals and business, embedded was the penalty for Obamacare changed. I'm not going to go through all this. Anyway, any of you have any questions while I'm scrolling through all the things that occurred? Everybody clear? Okay. All right. Sorry, guys. Trying to scroll back far enough that I don't get into that maze again. Okay. So we get to the executive orders. Congress failed to do anything. There was a goal to undermine Obamacare any which way they could. An executive order, for those that aren't familiar with it, is basically a direct order from the president that has the force of law. The problem is it can't contradict a law that Congress has passed. It has to work within it, unless the president has authority to do so. And he changed some things, making it harder and harder for Obamacare to fulfill its mission, okay? A little bit of trivia. The only president who didn't issue one was William Henry Harrison. And the Emancipation Proclamation itself was an executive order. Trump issued two related to the repeal or the attempt to repeal, one at the beginning of 2017, one near the end. And basically, the first one gave greater discretion to the states, for instance, for managing Medicaid. And some of the states were passing work requirements. Now think about that. What was Medicaid meant to do? It was meant to be a safety net for those who are the most poor. Now you're saying, and really if you don't think it through, it sounds like a reasonable idea. But you know, most people make the decision not to work, not based on whether they have Medicaid or not. There are many other things and benefits that may affect that decision, but not getting Medicaid is not really one of the up there on the top of their radar. But states are starting to do this. They're starting to limit, to lower their costs. Trump also directed his federal agency to use their authority to relieve citizens, businesses, states of the regulatory burdens. The president has within its power not to force payment of penalties. The president is like Frank Nitti, the enforcer. The second executive order now allows states to redefine essential health benefits. And this may not be kosher because the law in Congress was very clear. But within wherever there is discretion, the executive is pushing it. He also expanded the use of association health plans. Association health plans are those health plans that small businesses do. They create a health plan for their own businesses. What Trump is now encouraging, which may be a good thing, is that people combine with other small business, both within their states and others, so they have more market power to hopefully lower their negotiated rates. However, the problem with these plans is that they don't have to obey the dictates of Obamacare. They're excluded. So they don't have to act like the health plans within the marketplace. Also, the plans that don't have to act within the confines of the marketplace are the short-term plans. And in some states, that's the only plans available now. Insurers have left it completely. And these are 3-month to 3-month plans that also don't have to obey it. And that's going to have very important consequences, because the insurers now, who don't have to obey the dictates of Obamacare, are now going to cherry pick. And they're going to pull out the people who have low risk. And guess what? Those people in the exchanges, their risks are going to go up, and the premiums are going to go up and up. I'm just skipping some of these details for you because I want to give you the gist. Other things that the executive did was really restrict the open enrollment period. It used to be several months. Now it's a very short period of time. And drop the advertising so that people wouldn't know about it, in an attempt to really get rid of the insurance marketplace and try to create other things like the entities I told you about to allow more negotiation about the insurance. Really what it's doing, in effect, is not only getting rid of the mandate, but getting rid of the ability for insurers to charge one price for everyone. It's breaking up the plan by moving people out of the health insurance marketplace and into these other plans that are being created. The individual mandate, the final thing that I'm going to talk about today with you on this topic. What happened in the tax plan? The mandate itself was controversial from the get-go. There was a question of its legality. Ordinarily, it is unconstitutional to make someone buy insurance, okay? Unless there are certain restrictions met, okay? But the Supreme Court ruled then the individual mandate on its own was unconstitutional. How it was unconstitutional was the fact that people were being penalized for not buying insurance. That was the unconstitutional part. But then the Supreme Court sort of made up doctrine. Congress thought it was within its plenary powers, its abundant powers, to just create the individual mandate. Its commerce powers, you name them. It did not focus on the taxation powers because they thought it was a given. The Supreme Court tried to save Obamacare and tried to save the mandate by allowing the taxation and tying the taxation to the individual mandate. So what the Supreme Court said is, okay, we're just going to look at this as if you're taxing people who just don't have insurance. That's what it is. That is a made-up group. It doesn't make any sense. But it was the way to allow the penalties to go into effect. The problem with the penalties, of course, they were trivial for most people. The price of the penalties was much less for the premiums. So a lot of people opted out. It went up, and in 2016, it was about $700 per adult, or 2.5% of your yearly income, whichever was higher. So the wealthier were going to pay quite a bit for a penalty. So what it did is it made more of the wealthy get insurance and gave an incentive to the less wealthy, less sick, not to buy. This is the only part of the entire tax bill that relates to the individual mandate. And what it does, as you can see here, I lost it. Sorry, I'm having some dysfunction. Anyway, what it did is it dropped the 2.5% minimum to 0%, and it changed the numerical one, the $695, to 0. So essentially, you pay nothing if you don't get insurance. The only caveat is it wasn't going to start till the beginning of 2019. With this, the Congressional Budget Office, which is independent, calculated that there would be, over a 10-year period, $338 billion in savings, but 13 million Americans would lose their health insurance, essentially doubling the uninsured rate in 10 years. And that's because of how important the mandate is to the rest of the act. So here is what's happened with the individual mandate thus far. In 2010, the ACA was passed. 2012, as I said, the Supreme Court said that the mandate itself, the way it was initially written, was not unconstitutional. So basically, because of the way it tied the taxation to it, the mandate was okay. 2017, the penalty in this tax law was destroyed. And without the penalty, that mandate is worthless. It is worthless. And in fact, the thing that hurts Obamacare the most was the opinion written by the Supreme Court back in 2012. Essentially, the Supreme Court said, without the tax, you have no mandate. So, the mandate will be gone as of January 2019, so 6 months or so. The question now remains, without that mandate, what happens to the rest of Obamacare? What's going on now is this lawsuit. We've now got 20 plus Republican states filing suit against the US government saying, without the individual mandate, Obamacare is unconstitutional. Interestingly, so there's a lot of people who filed amicus briefs. These amicus briefs are written by parties who are not part of the lawsuit, but either on supportive of the plaintiff or the defendant. So now the court's got a whole bunch of documents on each side supporting their opinion. The argument for the unconstitutionality, and I'm not going to go into the details, is what I just told you. What the Supreme Court said back in 2012, the fact that the individual mandate is dependent on the tax, and without the tax, there's no mandate. Without the mandate, which is the centerpiece of Obamacare, and which Obama himself said there is no mandate there's no Obamacare without the mandate. And it all hinges, what is the court going to do? It all depends on the severability doctrine. The court, when it makes decisions, tries to keep contracts, law in place. It tries to save it. And the question is, will and can the court save Obamacare when the mandate fails? Obama wrote in a New England Journal of Medicine article this past year, repeal and replace is a deceptively catchy phrase. The truth is that healthcare reform is complex with many interlocking pieces, so that undoing some of it may undo all of it. And that is what's happening now. Things are in incredible flux. The only thing we can say for sure is as of January, there's no individual mandate. Otherwise, we have bupkis, okay? The plaintiffs, the attorneys general from the Republican states, are trying to get not the Supreme Court, but the lower court to invalidate Obamacare now until a decision is made. And that has not occurred. The question is, what comes next? I think a lot of what happens next is what's going to happen with these interim elections. The public is going to vote. And they may change the balance of power in Congress and may completely change the way things are going, or not. Are we going to revert to what we call the status quo antebellum, the way things were before Obamacare? Where obviously, no matter what happens, the way things are now, the uninsured is going to start to increase again. One of the other aims is to decrease the funding for Medicaid and Medicare. Why? On paper, it'll lower the costs long term. And just like they played with Obamacare in terms of shifting when things started, when they stopped, so to get a positive benefit, the Republicans are looking for the same thing. Ultimately, as much as I'm a fiscal conservative, I think we're heading down the path of Medicare for all. I think there are things that are going into place right now that are going to destroy the way healthcare is covered as it stands. Thank you on those positive words. Should I do questions on this one first?
Yeah, do questions. Yeah, that's too complex, and you can't.
Yeah, this is.
So we're going to do.
Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, we're going to do some questions first
on this topic before we move on to the law.
Well, you know I do. Well, let's talk about the ones on the someone on the web. Okay, Starina Hill says that it makes her wonder how many people with excellent health will not actually buy the insurance, because we all know we're not immortal and that accidents and diseases don't necessarily discriminate. So what's your thoughts on that?
That's exactly the problem, and that's the reason why the Congressional Budget Office made their estimations that the uninsured is going to double or so in the next 10 years. It's not just, though, the healthy. You've got 4 boxes, if you will. Across the top is health, and across the side, or the column, is wealth. Health, wealth. Okay? Those who are poor and are healthy and don't qualify for Medicaid, they're going to be under the most incentive not to buy insurance. Mm-hmm. And those variables interact to fill in the rest of those boxes, and the cutoffs are going to be arbitrary. Mm-hmm. But that's going to be a powerful incentive. One of the things that's they're attempting to do is to restrict Medicaid more. And that's a problem. Mm-hmm. That's a problem for the healthcare system. And really, why? Anybody want to speak up? Why? Let's take for granted that everybody in politics, it's a big given, wants to have a better healthcare system. Why are the Republicans doing what they're doing? Anybody? I know you all have thoughts. People fight about it all the time.
Ask that question one more time.
Why, if you want to allow that the Republicans, and the Democrats for that matter, to have good reasons for doing what they're doing, what would be the good reason or the valid reason that Republicans are doing what they're doing? Yes.
Hold on. We need your mic on. Austin's deserted us again. Roger has it. Go ahead, try now. Yeah, there you go.
I think it comes down to an argument on whether you see health care as a commodity or a right of the people in this country. And I think that, and I'm not saying rightly or unrightly, but I think the majority of Republicans probably see it as a commodity. And I'm not sure I agree with that. I think if the majority of Americans deserve freedom, and yet less than 5% of our population going back 200 years has served in the military to ensure that freedom, I think if the majority deserve health care, then that's going to be provided by a very small proportion of health care providers. And I think a lot of Republican health care providers see a problem in that.
Thank you.
Yes,
and thank you for keeping, this is a topic that is very tough to keep the tone positive. Mm-hmm. Right? And I'm trying to keep it that way, and I appreciate that.
I'm curious. Can I ask the audience a
Sure.
question? How many people in the audience, just a show of hands, how many people in the audience believe that health care is a God-given right?
Raise them high if you believe that.
About a third, maybe a quarter. No, about 25% maybe. Okay, so let me just ask it the other way, just to be sure that I get a good analysis. How many people here believe that it is, if you can afford it and it's what it's what your responsibility is, then you buy it and you get it. It's personal responsibility. Who believes that? So not everybody has.
No. How about uncertain? Who are uncertain?
Yeah, who don't know? Who are okay. Or non-committal.
So it's almost like, to me, it looks about equal almost in each.
Yeah, I think a bias towards personal responsibility. I would say, I think
and
that
I find interesting. Remember, before we get to you, hey Bob, remember that the people have gotten used to Obamacare. Obamacare really had as one of its underpinning that it's a right. Very hard when a luxury turns into a necessity to take that back.
Mm-hmm.
The voting population, all right?
Here, stand where the camera is.
What happened?
You're out of
I'm
the
out of the I need the exercise. Anyway, the people have gotten used to having this access. If anybody has a pre-existing condition, they really appreciate the fact that if they buy insurance, they can get it without a hitch, and it's not going to be so pricey that they can't get it. The problem on the other hand is that the Republicans, and I was one of them, for many years have been living behind the mantra of repealing Obamacare. Almost so much that it becomes a thought that is not questioned anymore. And the people who voted Republicans in also, a lot of these people, as part of their platform, was to repeal Obamacare. And part of the impetus and the evidence was what was happening in these insurance markets that I outlined. But all these things are in play, and it's going to really challenge the way things are going forward.
So I was just going to ask where health insurance came from, and you got to kind of look at that because...
Wait. Austin's not on the mic again. Roger's got it.
Check. Okay.
Good.
I was just going to ask where health insurance comes from initially, because if you were going to apply for a job or two jobs and one place offered, hey, we'll pay for your health insurance, and the other one didn't, that was a benefit, and you'd go to that job, so to speak. But prior to any health insurance, what happened? You know, the community took care of it, and you paid by chickens or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows the answer to that?
But they didn't have VADs when they paid for chickens, number one. Number
Who
two,
knows how health... Go ahead, Joe.
No, I don't know I mean, you'll have a more technical answer, but I'm going to answer your question. We, the group I'm with, we pay the employees' portion of the health insurance. However, if it were me looking at a job, two equal jobs, and this one had that as a benefit and this one didn't have it as a benefit, it would depend to me on how much the insurance is going to cost me, what the plan is that if I were to buy it myself for a like plan, if that plan was going to work for me, because, you know, just because you provide insurance doesn't mean it's a good insurance plan, and then consider if the amount of money I would make at the other place was more than enough to compensate for whatever that differential would be. I think it's more complex than they just provide this benefit, because sometimes the benefit isn't really a benefit. It's a smoke and mirror benefit. It has to be a good plan. It's my view.
So I want to answer one of the questions that was raised just now, and I want to address what you said. So health insurance, how that started was during World War II, price controls were created so that your wages couldn't go up. And they had price controls all over the country for different jobs, all right? Because they wanted to control inflation and costs while all the money was being poured into the war effort. Part of that, a consequence of that, is the government then gave companies the ability to deduct on their taxes if they covered insurance for their employees. And so now companies started having an incentive to compete with other ones, because if you have boss A, boss B, two different companies, and they're each going to pay you the same, part of like what Joe was mentioning, if you're provided insurance, all of a sudden people are going to flock. And that's how insurance came to be and spread. And then we obviously had the question of the elderly and the poor with the 60s that we had Medicare and Medicaid passed. But that's how health insurance came to be. It was the government's fault. It put the price controls, and then it gave them an out. In terms of your decision to work for one versus the other, I think most of us would welcome being covered by our employer. I can tell you, being both an employee at one time and now being independent, there are many things that happen As an employee, you get a lot of help making your decisions. Insurance is tough to buy. Now, I'm hoping some of the stuff that I mentioned to you today helps you a little bit in that as an offshoot. But it's very hard to buy. But when you're working for a hospital, et cetera, there's usually people who can sit down with you and explain to you the different options. You know, now in the health insurance marketplace, they've got bronze, silver, and gold. And just the way each state rolls that out pushes people to one or the other. Personally, I got a gold. And why? Well, one, I could afford it, okay? But more importantly, the gold plans, and the only difference in those plans essentially, in terms of your payments, are the premiums are higher for the gold, but the coverage is better. Premiums are lower for the bronze, but the coverage is less better, worse, okay? And so, for me as an individual independent, if you're filing 1099, your expense of insurance is completely deductible on your expenses. So another reason why it's very good for me to get a gold plan is since I'm 1099, that comes straight as an expense for me. A gold plan for my family, I just deduct as a business expense. And that's something else that enters into the equation. Others out in the community feel, oh, well, I've got to buy insurance. Let me go buy the bronze and then find out, oh my God, I've got large co-payments, I've got large deductibles, large co-insurance. You know, these are all problems. Any other questions?
Yes, yes, online. We have this is from Starina. So maybe this is a terminology issue, but a mandate orders you to do something. ACA provides you an option, get insurance or pay a tax. There's several questions, so let me, she adds, sometimes the benefit is not really a benefit, which is what we had discussed. But all right, let's go through that question first, because I've got several.
So I didn't see the question there. What's the question?
Okay, the terminology, maybe, so you're saying a mandate, but it provides an option. You're saying it's a mandate and that she's concerned about a terminology issue, like it's bad. It's a mandate, but you either get insurance or you pay a tax. So it's, I guess, a requirement, but I'm not sure what her point exactly is, but there is an option. You do have a choice.
You don't have to, and particularly,
or pay a tax.
And particularly, and there's a third option. If you're one of the excluded groups,
right.
American Indians, certain religious sects, but if you exclude those for a moment, it's a mandate because you get a penalty if you don't do it. Mm-hmm. And that's what the Supreme Court had a problem with.
Well, I have a problem with it too, but why not just say that instead of, okay, let me ask the question a different way. How many people feel that it should be a requirement for anyone who has a job to buy insurance? They have to buy insurance. It's required. You do not have a choice to not have insurance. Anybody believe that that's reasonable?
Are you talking about if your employer doesn't supply it, or
Correct.
that the employer
Your employer doesn't supply it? Because a lot of employers don't supply insurance. Dave?
We already do. Ever since I've been working, I've been paying Social Security tax and been Medicare tax. We already do that.
Good point. Good point. You're absolutely right. And
many
pay it and never
Go ahead, I'm
get
sorry,
it. No, I'm sorry. Many pay it and never get to use it. They die too soon. Go ahead.
The tax is okay. The tax is not the problem. The problem is mandating somebody to do something and penalizing them for not doing it. It's nomenclature, okay? But it's the way that it was supported. Because without the taxation, it's unconstitutional to have an insurance mandate. And that is both what saved Obamacare in 2012 and is what potentially is going to destroy it in 2018. Mm-hmm. We all good?
Oh, well, how does the ACE, I think she means ACA, this is Dorena also, affect private companies? If you don't have the money, how do you And then Larry Kopak, if you don't have the money, how do you pay? So your socioeconomics should determine or partially determine your health. It's a question, rhetoric, but it's a question. Is the older population siphoning on the young or expensive medical, and then it stops from there? So don't we have fines for healthy people who don't buy insurance so that we as a community can avoid the death spiral? That's from Renee Ninnis. And those are the questions.
Okay,
I mean,
so hold off before you go any further, because, and I'm going to make it brief. The best thing for an insurance program is to have a lot of healthy people in it, all right? And if they don't opt to get in, you got to force them to get in, because it won't be able to accommodate the sick people, and the sick people won't be able to afford. Big businesses do that already. That's what they do. That's where that model comes from. A big employer, a hospital, pays insurance. You have some of your plan that typically you'll pay half of the premiums. But they already do that. And that's how you get the healthy people to support the ill. The poor have some safety mechanisms. One thing that Obamacare did was to increase the cutoff to qualify for Medicaid. I think it went from 133% of the poverty line to 400%. I think an article just came out that 400% of the poverty line in San Francisco is above $100,000. So, it varies state by state. So these are all ways that it was meant to protect. Really, the most vulnerable, the ones that didn't qualify for Medicaid and didn't get it through their workplace, those are the ones who go to the health insurance marketplace. And that's what that was designed to do. Right now, under 10% of the people in this country use it. And as a user, as someone who was forced to go to the health insurance marketplace, it was a disaster for me. It is hard to do. As a doctor, it was hard to understand the alternatives. And all of a sudden, there are these plans that are outside the health insurance marketplace that are these short-term plans that you can pay for, you get what you pay for. And it gets very confusing.
Mm-hmm. Larry Kapak says, for 40 years I have cut costs. Apparently he hasn't been sick or used insurance for a while. So, yeah, that's right. I mean, that's the way it works. But let me ask you this, Dr. Blitz. You've been to San Francisco, haven't you?
Yes.
Okay. You ever see that? You've gone and been amazed by the Transamerica Tower, haven't you?
Okay.
It's a beautiful building, isn't it?
Yes.
It is. My problem is this, is that insurance companies want it both ways. And, everything in business, everything I do, and there's a lot of other people out here that have businesses, we take risks. And those risks include failure, financial devastation. The greater your risk sometimes, the greater the reward, depending on how, what the situation may be. Insurance companies, they take artificial risk. They stack the deck. They're making gazillions of dollars. They're just not making 20% profit. They're making gazillions of dollars.
And it all went up under Obamacare.
Right.
One thing to remember.
Exactly. Oh, I remember that. And then when there is a problem, they don't want to pay or they want a bailout. And it's not how the system is meant to work. If you're going to advocate, I don't mean this as a personal thing, but if you're going to advocate for a free market, and you're going to say the free market is what actually works best, then the insurance companies, in my opinion, need to work in a free market just like everybody else does. And that's where I have an issue with all of this.
Well, I used to be much more supportive of a free market before Obamacare came into being. That's personally. But the free market will not work for healthcare for the reasons that I set forth. Okay. Those market imperfections that don't work. And you've got to curtail the insurance companies. It's not that they're bad. They're businesses that are trying to make a profit, and they have to deal. There is market competition. You've got choices amongst your insurers, which have narrowed now. But go ahead.
To kind of add what this gentleman had said, so healthcare being right or a commodity, so there could be a middle ground where it's a public good, not as just either you have it or you don't, or everyone has access. A public good could institute or justify something as like a universal minimum, and instead of doing individual mandates, the government could reallocate funds from like the Reagan bill, the emergency department visits, to something like preventative.
And I mean, that's horribly inefficient. You're absolutely right. It's horribly inefficient and even more expensive. And look, I think you and I probably share this ideology a little bit more than and I'm glad about that. But I'm fed up. I'm fed up too. I'm fed up with people who suck the system dry, don't want to contribute, and can. We don't hold people in our society accountable, and I'm tired of that. But at the same time, when there's an innocent child, or it is the working poor that's working 2 jobs, single mom, maybe she made some poor decisions, whatever the case may be, it doesn't make any difference, and she should not have access to the same level of care that I can simply because I can afford it. That's fundamentally wrong on a moral level, in my opinion. But I'm tired of people allowing, this turned into a political conversation, I apologize for that, but we have allowed people in this country to simply be unaccountable for themselves, and we're going to do anything and everything for them. And we can't stop it with the current generation, but we can stop it for future generations. But we better stop it, or this is going to be anarchy before it's all over with. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, I hope you don't mind the political diatribe.
So my sort of comment on it is, well, within our own profession, we can't treat symptoms, we have to treat the root cause. And sort of thinking about that for this model, we need healthy people to support the system. Like, that's what the model needs. So we need more healthy people. I think, if there's things in place right now that I don't agree with, but there's also things that we can do. Like on the nutrition labels, you'll notice that there's the daily recommended values percentages for everything except for sugar. Sugar, there's no daily value percentage. So if someone looks at a Coke and sees that the daily recommended sugar is like 450% in the one Coke, less people will drink it, right? So I think, that's a problem. And there's also something that I just saw a couple days ago in another country, I believe it's Britain. They just opened up their first gym that has, the treadmills and the cycles actually link back up into the electric grid, which reduces the cost of people's, electric costs. So then you've got a monetary, like if we can take it to the next level and put that in people's homes, now they have a monetary incentive to exercise and it's clean energy. So environment, economy, health, all in the same thing, which will then, I imagine, would trickle to healthier people contributing to the insurance. Just a couple of thoughts.
Well, I appreciate that. The thing I want you all to be thinking about as we're raising these points is, where is that going to lead us? Now, anything you do by making further distinctions is going to add to the cost of health care in some fashion. Why? More administrative cost. If you distinguish between one mother or another, one who could work, the other one, and you make these criteria, the more criteria you add, now someone's got to be checking on that. And it ends up siphoning off some money and adding to the expense. The question is the additional expense of administrative costs going to be worth it to pursue those people who are milking the system? Okay? That's one question, and the answer is not clear. Now, when you go on the individual mandate route and sort of requiring everybody to get insurance, really the next natural step, if that fails, and it's not something that I'm excited about, It's where I think we're headed. And let me add as an additional thing, there is no such thing as a perfect health marketplace. There are trade-offs. Socialized medicine, the trade-off that it had to pay was the triaging of people and the waits. Because, as I said a couple of days ago, economics is all about scarcity and the way you deal with it. And so there are long waits for orthopedic procedures, long waits for cabbages. And access to the system is not as easy. Good access to primary care, but beyond that, anybody of you who's ever been in one of these HMO type plans know that they've got to go through some barriers before they see a specialist. And if they don't want those barriers, they have to pay more for it. And we've got a very complicated system that's been made even more complex, that was starting to fail in some respects, and now the rug is being pulled out from underneath it. And the question is, what do we do next? We know now, unless there's a court case that says that that taking out the taxation for the individual mandate is unconstitutional, we have lost that mandate. And remember, the court's going to have a big barrier for saying that, because back in 2012, they said exactly that the mandate could not exist without the taxation. So think about where things are getting set up. It's going to take a couple of years for this to work through the system, but we know there's no mandate. And the first response is the insurers. They're all going nuts because uncertainty is not good when you're an insurer. They build certainty into their system. It sounds odd, but they make it a certainty because of the population and the probabilities. And now they can't even do that. So a lot of them are raising premiums to cover that uncertainty, and a lot of them are leaving the markets. The people who are surviving in the health insurance marketplace are the ones that traditionally catered to Medicaid plans, that were used to controlling costs. Now you, as a purchaser in the health insurance market, do you want to buy insurance from a place that's used to operating under Medicaid principles and Medicaid costs? You have to think about those things. This is what's happening, because it's true. A study of each of these markets, one of the generalizations is the big Aetna, Anthem, and several other the big ones, they all failed because they were on the profitability model, not on the cutting cost model. Cutting costs is good, but you get what you pay for. And it's not great. I mean, I can go and satisfy the mandate by buying a plan that I pay $5 a month for, who decide to cut all my things, and when it really comes down to it, covers my preventive care, but God forbid I'm hospitalized, right? And all the technicalities. I mean, the insurers in some respect really were part of the evil. They're good, they need to be there, but they took advantage. And they take advantage of the individual. That's what all those big multi-million-dollar lawsuits were about. People being withheld from care they needed, you know? Anyway, all right. Should we just go on to the next topic now, Joe? Because I think we're running out of time.
Yes, okay, next topic.
All right.
Dr. Blitz is in law school, by the way, so you know. So he keeps testing his term papers on us.
So I think this is an important topic. I think all of us need to know a bit about economics, like we spoke about the other day, about whether you should have an ECMO program, whether you should get health insurance. In the system, how are we going to cover all the people? Most of us are not worried about it ourselves, right? Most of us here are covered through our employment. Just imagine if that went, what's going to happen? All right. Are we good? Not yet.
We are now.
All right. I'm going to quickly go through this, and then we can have some questions, because The talk is multifocal, all right? And we'll just stop it at a convenient point. Are you going to put my timer, or the timer's foregone conclusion? All right. What I'm going to do is start out about the basics of law for you as a perfusionist, what you should know to protect yourself. The last part of my talk, which I'm probably going to not be able to get to, we could do another time, is if you wanted to go into the medical legal consulting business and what's important about that. So, perfusion and the law. What laws govern cardiac surgery? There are three areas. The most important is tort law, but contract law and criminal law also play a part. I'm going to skip down to get to the nitty-gritty. Okay. History of malpractice. Way back to Hammurabi. Remember eye for an eye? If the doctor has treated a gentleman with a lancet of bronze and has caused the gentleman to die, or has opened an abscess of the eye for a gentleman with a bronze lancet and has caused the loss of the gentleman's eye, one shall cut off his hands. I don't know how they got eye for eye out of that. It's actually like hand for eye, right?
Right. Hold on a second. Somebody got a knife? Can I have your arm?
In English common law, where most of our common law comes from, in 1615, there was a ruling where a servant, in other words, a slave, was injured by a doctor. Both the servant and his master can sue, because, right, the servant is his property, and for employing unwholesome medicine. These are the roots of malpractice. Most of the laws pertaining to malpractice are individualized to the state, all right, and it's made by court opinion. And I'll raise up some interesting cases that have occurred with perfusionists as the defendant. Well, how does a lawsuit proceed? It starts with a complaint, where the plaintiff says, you did X, Y, Z to me. 30 days later, an answer is needed for due process to occur. After that answer is given, there's a period of discovery where each side tries to get the information from the other side so that they both can be working with the same information base. Interrogatories are made. Those are questions asked of the other side as they go back and forth. Did you do this? Did you know this? And you also obtain all the medical records. Once you've got that, you need expert witnesses, because who's judging whether you have a case? Ultimately, it's a jury of your peers, but not really. It's the common folk who know nothing about medicine. So, you need to have an expert to say why there's a case or why there's not a case. And ultimately, sometimes what happens is the case becomes a battle of the experts. Depositions are taken. Those are sworn statements, just as if you were giving a recitation at trial. Then, many states require that you go through ADR, alternative dispute resolution, meaning an intermediary tries to solve the problem before you make it to trial. Actual trials occur in a very small proportion of malpractice cases. Importantly, the plaintiff has the burden of proof. Just like in criminal law, innocent until proven guilty, you have not done harm unless the plaintiff proves that you did. Any litigation within tort law, which tort law is any time somebody causes you a harm that's not a criminal offense. Those are the three ways that you can sue somebody. You can sue them for negligence, you can sue them for an intentional tort, or sue them on the basis of strict liability. The distinction between these is strict liability, you don't have to, it doesn't matter what your reason was. If you make a vehicle whose engine explodes, That is product liability, that is strict liability. There's no other thing to discuss. Intentional tort is when you intend to cause the effect. If I go and slap Joe, I've committed an intentional tort. And right, it's not only civil, but it's also criminal. Assault, battery. Negligence is where the vast majority of cases are in medical malpractice. Okay. What defines negligence? How do you prove negligence? There's 4 parts to it. One part is someone's got to tell us what the standard of care is. And I've got to tell you, the standard of care is not something written down in a book. You can look it up. All right? As I mentioned the other day, standard of care is not guidelines, not recommendations, not society statements. The standard of care is going to be defined by the appropriate person who, in the case of medical negligence, is the expert witness. All right? If you're a perfusionist getting sued, there needs to be a perfusionist who says what the standard of care is. All right? And the standard that's applied in general is the failure to exercise the standard of care that a reasonably prudent person would have exercised in a similar situation. Okay? What would a reasonably prudent person do? So what's a reasonably prudent person besides something that's hard to say? It's the hypothetical person who exercises a degree of attention, knowledge, intelligence, and judgment that society requires of its members for the protection of their own and of others' interests. So people sue each other for negligence all the time outside of the medical arena. And it all depends on whether someone failed to meet the standard of care. When we talk about malpractice, that's the specific situation of negligence on the part of a professional. There's legal malpractice, medical malpractice. The first actual case to talk about malpractice was in Iowa in 1872, and they defined the standard of care. And this is important because it's changed. And if I have to say, if anybody here does expert witnessing, one of the biggest mistakes people do is not understand what the standard of care is. Anybody think they know what it is? It's not what's on here. Okay? The standard of care nowadays is what a minimally competent person in your field would do. It's not what the average person. Biggest mistake people make is if they go on the stand and say, the average perfusionist wouldn't do that, that testimony is thrown out. It's what the minimally competent perfusionist would do under the circumstances. If a big bunch of air comes through and the perfusionist sees there's air in the arterial line, what would a minimally competent perfusionist do?
Turn the flow up so that no one will see it.
What'd you say?
Turn the flow up so no one will see it.
And that, by the way, is intentional tort. Okay? But that's the standard. It's not the average, and it's not what the expert would do. There are perfusionists amongst you that would handle it better than others. Okay? We don't account for whether you're 1 day out of training or seasoned 60 years. You're all held to the same standard. And that would be the minimally competent person in your field. And think about that. Think about circumstances that you've seen, whether it's perfusionist or surgeon. And think about what that would mean. And I'm going to tell you from experience, it is extremely hard to define that standard of care. All right? And there's many times differences of opinion about what a perfusionist would do. Now, if I thought that the surgeon should have used 9-O-proline instead of 7-O-proline, and he didn't, that is a matter of personal preference. It is not the standard of care. A lot of people make the mistake of taking their preference and saying it's the standard of care. Circulatory arrest, antegrade, retrograde, isolated circulatory arrest. Some of them have been proven in our literature that it's better than other options. But all of them are within the standard of care. If a patient undergoes cardiac surgery and has an isolated circulatory arrest period of 60 minutes and then gets a stroke, did the surgeon meet the standard of care? I'm asking you that as a rhetorical question because it's not that easy to determine. I will tell you, at the start of most of my circulatory arrest cases, unless it's really straightforward, like all I'm doing is doing a distal anastomosis to the aorta, I know then within a reasonable certainty of how much time it's going to take me. However, if I'm going into an aortic dissection and I have no idea where the tear is, right? You've been in those cases. It could be a quickie or it could be a devastating long case. And the problem is, what would the surgeon, before he's gone on circ arrest, what would the minimally competent surgeon do? If I don't know how long it's going to be, it might be very reasonable, since circulatory arrest by itself is within the standard of care, for me to just use circulatory arrest. I personally don't do it. It's my preference. I think it's better to use ancillary perfusion, but still within the standard of care. And if a surgeon goes up and says, that's not the standard of care, there's more incidence of brain injury, he would most likely be wrong. Okay? Those are the kind of distinctions that I'm trying to make with you. Expert testimony, like a surgeon or a perfusion, is required to prove a few of the elements of a case. Malpractice has 4 elements, 4 things that the plaintiff has to prove. That 1, the defendant owed a duty to the patient. Okay? 2, what is that duty, and did the defendant breach it? 3, did that breach cause the harm? And the harm is manifested as damages. You've got to have all 4. If I go in there and do something below the standard of care, if I breach the standard of care, but the patient hasn't suffered any injury, no case. If a patient suffers a bad injury for a prolonged circ arrest period, where I did everything right, that's not a case. Because although they had damages, there was no breach in the standard and no causation. Okay? Those are the main distinctions. And they occur in approximately that order. You first have to determine whether there was a duty. And we'll talk about that in a second, whether the duty was breached, that the breach was the proximate cause of the injury. And I'll tell you what that is. I have a mnemonic for this. Joe knows this. D.B. Cooper is dead, okay, for this. Duty, breach, causation, damage. Everybody know who D.B. Cooper is? I see very few saying yes. Youngins don't know. Famous bank robber. Where was it, Joe? Was it in Wisconsin?
No, it was going from Oregon down to California, yeah.
Who was it, a bank heist?
No, it was... No,
what did
you know, okay.
Tell me.
He's trying to get me to tell y'all I was D.B. Cooper, and I was, but that's a different story. So it was a airliner, and he hijacked an airline. I think it was Northwest Airline, I think. And anyway, it was a DC-9, I believe, was the plane. I'm pretty sure it was. And anyway, he hijacked it. He got a bunch of money, had the air pilot take off, had him slow the airplane down, and had everybody, like, let all the passengers off, just took the crew and had the crew up front. Anyway, he opened the back door that you could ingress and egress from board and unboard the airplane from, and he requested a parachute as well, obviously with all the money. Anyway, he jumped out of the plane somewhere over Oregon, and the case has never really been solved. But it resulted in the airlines on the DC-9, they made the DB Cooper latch. And so now when the plane is flying, the wind makes the latch slide over, so the door cannot be opened anymore while the plane is flying. So there's a DB Cooper latch.
Unless you're Goldfinger, you just go through.
Unless
it.
yeah, but DB Cooper
so
doesn't get any
DB Cooper,
royalties.
there was all this controversy over the years whether DB Cooper was dead or not. That's the way I remembered it. And the question is raised, and Joe, I tell you,
I knew that was coming. I knew it was coming.
He has a little bit too much information. More proof. All right. The problem in medicine, as opposed to law, and when we're trying to decide whether a case is proven or not, medical people have a hard time with it. Because every day we deal with the level of scientific proof. We try to make decisions based on science, which is either irrefutable or as close to irrefutable as you can get. Whereas legal criteria go down from criminal to civil, right? We all know, we all watch the show. Criminal cases, you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, which is much higher standard than civil cases, all right? And in civil cases, you have to prove whether it was more likely than not. It's not a huge standard, okay? If there was a better than 50% chance, you go that direction, one way or the other. So, who has a duty of care? Each individual is obligated to be aware of the effect of his actions on others. We're talking in general, you and me in the street, you and me on Bourbon Street, okay? You owe a duty of care to the people around you. It's very situational, right? Showing your breasts off a balcony on Bourbon Street is a different standard of care if it occurs there as opposed to in front of a courthouse, right?
Does that depend on whether it's a man or a woman? And if they're man boobs?
I think, well, on Bourbon Street, I would think that the standard is very flexible, just like Vegas. Anyway, all persons owe a duty of obligation to act or refrain from acting when the action could endanger others in a reasonably foreseeable area. Foreseeability is very important. In your thought processes, could you have foreseen that this would happen? Now, I will tell you, this duty of care is very important, and it changes with the country. All right, I'm going to ask you a question. You are enjoying a day at the beach. Lying, you put your chair or your umbrella right where the waves crest. You're just above that wet line. You're sitting there, sunglasses on, enjoying your pina colada. A little baby by himself goes onto the water, plops down face down. He's a foot away from you. Do you have a duty to do something to save that baby? Who says yes, you have a duty?
Moral or legal?
We're talking about legal.
Legal. Legal?
Well, I'm setting it up, right? Okay. Ethically, we would all think yes, but legally, no. You can sit there, you can watch that baby die, and you would not be legally responsible. Now, if you're a parent of that child, different story. Then you owe a duty. But a stranger's child, now, if you have children over your house for a birthday party, and one of them falls into the pool, you have a duty, a legal duty, to save that child. If you have a pool in most states, right, you've got to make sure that you have something protecting the general public from getting in there. All right? So a lot of this duty of care depends on the relationships and the situations. The standard of conduct for us as professionals is higher. It's more than ordinary skill. It's the knowledge and skill of a member of your profession in good standing in similar communities. And the standard used to be local because healthcare really, back in the 1800s, there wasn't these national conferences, forget about international ones, right, where everybody attended and kept up with all the information. So the standards used to be very local. Your experts had to come from the local community. Now think about that. You're in a local community, you're a cardiac surgeon, someone sued you for negligence, and the only people they could have as expert witness are the cardiac surgeons in your city. Now you can think about what that entails, but you have to think about what the problem is there and who it favors, right? So it then expanded to people in other communities that are similar to yours. And now for most of us, like in cardiac surgery, it's a national. For a perfusionist, national standard. Not, oh, the guys in this town do this or that. And some would say international. And I told you the situation is very important. These are just the evolution of cases of how we define the standard of care, and I've already told you that. The thinking at first was average, ordinary. It's not anymore. It's minimally competent. My doctor told me to exercise. It gave me more energy and I got more work done. The more work I did, the more mistakes I made, then I got fired. That's why I'm suing my doctor. I didn't just put that there to make you laugh. I put that there to illustrate a principle. When we talk about causation, right, we would all think this is nonsense. However, there's two different ways of thinking of causation. One is actual, two is the foreseeability, all right? Actually, the doctor did cause this guy getting fired, right? Because the series of events happened that resulted in this, that had the doctor not done that, perhaps this guy wouldn't get fired. But that's not, thankfully, the legal principle we go by. It's foreseeability, and I'm going to talk about that now. So there's a two-pronged test: factual causation and legal causation. If it's factual, like that cartoon, doesn't imply that there's legal. The plaintiff has to prove both. So the plaintiff starts out with the standard of care, whether there was a breach. Next is whether the breach was a cause in fact of what the patient suffered. And once proving that, you got to prove also that it was a proximate cause of the injury. And the difference is a cause in fact analysis in most states is if the surgeon didn't do this, the patient, more likely than not, would not have suffered that injury. Okay? That's called but-for causation. But for the surgeon doing this, the patient would not have suffered the injury. After proving that element, you've got to prove that it was foreseeable. Would a surgeon looking forward know that this was a probable outcome? Okay? And that's proximate causation. Within proximate causation, there's a thing called res ipsa loquitur. And why do I mention that? It pertains a lot to medical cases. Let's say a patient dies after surgery and a foreign body, they've died of sepsis, and an autopsy is performed and there's an infected lap pad in the belly. It may be hard for somebody to prove the chain of what happened. Whose fault it was it multiple people at fault? We call that res ipsa loquitur, and all that's important is that the patient suffered damage. We know that somehow someone did something bad to put that lap pad in there. Unless you're going to argue that that's foreseeable and it's a complication of surgery and that's okay. Very few would argue that. But you can see how gray areas might come up. And so nowadays it's very easy for the patient to sue under res ipsa and sues the hospital because, as you'll see, in most cases, the hospital is ultimately responsible for a lot of people in the OR. So one way or the other, even though no one really proved to satisfaction that the causation change. And so that's why it speaks for itself when someone's trying to prove injury. Just going to bring up a couple of cases that pertain to this issue of proximate cause. So there was a case, Parker versus Mercy General, back in 2004. Parker, the patient, was seen in the ED for a skin rash, complained of nausea, was given IV Finnegan by the nurse. Parker felt burning in his hand. Ultimately, the patient developed a phlebitis, sclerotic vein, and had to undergo a venectomy. So the question is, we go through our consequence, right? Our chain. Was there a duty? Was there a breach? Was causation achieved? And were there damages? Well, we see obviously there were damages here, right? The issue in this case is, did the administration of the Phenergan cause the injury to the vein? In this case, the Supreme Court ultimately decided, because they defined proximate cause as follows, is that which in a natural and continuous sequence, unbroken by a new and independent cause, caused the injury. That's proximate causation that distinguishes it from factual. And in this case, there was no evidence. Yes, it could have, but there could have been other reasons for the sclerotic vein, and it was consistent with the facts. So here, the hospital was not liable. And you might say in your mind, well, it sounds like the patient, that this is what happened. But a lot of the benefit of the doubt goes to the defendant. Damages. This one's pretty straightforward, right? Guy walks in like this, and the lawyer is thinking cha-ching. Damage equals injury. The important thing for a tort case, for a malpractice case, is it compensable? Can someone get paid for it? Can the damages be proven to that degree? And I'm not going to belabor the point. There's non-economic versus economic. Caps on insurance usually deal with the non-economic portion, not the economic. The question in a case, if something bad happens, who is the defendant in the case? And sometimes it's not clear. The case gets decided by two separate groups. One, the judge. The responsibility of the judge in a jury trial is to explain the law to the jury. The jury then takes the law and weighs the facts and decides on either guilt or innocence, or for the plaintiff or for the defendant. If the judge makes a mistake in law, you can appeal that. What you can't appeal are the facts. Your initial court case, whatever the facts that have made it into the record, are the facts that the Supreme Court or a superior court decides, based on whether there was an error in law. Vicarious liability is very important to us. It is when one party may, under certain circumstances, be held liable for the actions of another, even though that first party didn't do anything. And this is the situation, number one, in some cases with the hospital, when someone in the OR does something. Number two, situation with a surgeon and someone in the OR. And there's a lot of cases of that. If a perfusionist clearly does something that injures or kills the patient, is the surgeon ultimately responsible or not? Who thinks here that in the modern day, should the surgeon be held accountable for that when it was clear? Let's make it easy, because we want to make something that clearly a perfusionist did wrong. Cannula coming out of the aorta, that's the perfusionist's fault. Something clearly within the scope of the perfusionist. What would most of you say? Would you think that if you made that mistake, should you really be the one to blame, or should they hold the surgeon accountable? Should they hold the surgeon accountable? Who thinks so?
For the
perfusionist's error.
No. Why?
Okay, so I take it most of you think that it's the perfusionist as a professional who should shoulder the blame. Many places judge it on the way that you guys think, but it wasn't that way until recently. For many years, the surgeon was held responsible, and there's still some cases that come up, and it becomes a finger-pointing game, okay? At some point, the hemoglobin during bypass drops to 3. Patient dies. No one, so you're looking retrospectively, and someone says, well, hemoglobin of 3 is too low to perfuse the body. Let's say 3, I could say 1. So now it's a finger-pointing game. Should the perfusionist should have known that the hemoglobin was 3? Yes? No?
I mean, it depends.
All of you.
I mean, yeah, I mean, okay.
You're right?
I mean, yeah, it's a, I mean,
There's a point to
I'm
this.
going with you. Yeah,
Okay?
yeah.
Should the surgeon know?
Yeah, he should be informed.
Should be informed, right? So in a lot of cases, perfusionists, well, I told the surgeon, and he said not to worry about it. Now, is the perfusionist responsible? Yes?
It depends on what happened.
Let's forget about any other sources of error. Dilution, maybe it's a baby. The hemoglobin unexpectedly and verifiably drops to 3. Perfusion gets the blood gas back, oh my God. Tells the surgeon and the anesthesiologist. And the surgeon insists on giving no blood, exogenous blood. Are you still responsible? Yes? So if you, are you not responsible? Okay. Not that easy. Most of you are undecided, I take it. It's not that easy. There are some things that you are professional enough that you should override. That you would be negligent not to insist. You know, no, I've got to point out to you, doctor, this patient will die at that hemoglobin level. We've got another half hour left of the case. There's no way that we're going to be perfusing well. So, as you get more insistent, at some point, you would probably be able to defend yourself as not being responsible. But it's these complexities that come up very often. You'll also see that plaintiffs often will blame everybody in the room, including the hospital, because of the deep pocket theory, okay? The perfusionist and possibly the surgeon, whoever has the biggest malpractice limits, and then obviously the hospital. Hospital always gets named because ultimately everyone in the chain is responsible for the entire damages. So the plaintiff can come after any one of them. So let's say the verdict is for the plaintiff. Now the plaintiff is trying to get the money. He's going to get it from the hospital or the surgeon, but most likely to get it the most for the hospital. In some states, if a patient sues a surgeon in a state hospital, the surgeon, it doesn't even go on the surgeon's record. The state says that if the hospital is in the suit, the hospital shoulders the blame, and there's nothing on the database that appears for the surgeon, which is very unlike most states. Anyway, the issues that we've been talking about are obviously the issues of agency that come up, but they're not clear questions, but you need to think about the scenarios that occur, and if you're ever involved in a suit or an expert, these are tough questions to answer. Anyway, I think for time constraints, I'm going to stop there. I have a lot more that I can cover, but I think if there are any questions, we can go with that. Does anybody have any question about the elements of a malpractice case? Anybody want to give their own personal anecdote and what perhaps the verdict was or something they've seen to throw it up to the audience? Any brave souls?
There's a lot of online. Regarding the duty to act, Joe Vadrine, my buddy Jojo from Thibodeau, he say that some teenagers in Florida recorded a man drowning and laughed about it. They are being prosecuted, so they're being held criminally liable. So you talked about civil liability and duty to act. What about that aspect of it with the baby?
There is so these are the gray areas, both civilly and criminally. Generally, many cases fail criminally, but then are proven civilly because the standard of evidence, right? That's how OJ, right? OJ won the criminal case, but lost big time on the civil case, and then has no money to pay, quote unquote. In this situation, the question is whether there was a duty. These guys went out of their way to record. They obviously knew about it, but it's a very iffy question about whether they are either criminally or civilly liable. One thing that I didn't tell you is there are laws that if you go to help somebody and then you stop, now you're liable. You have got the duty. If you go and the baby is there and you try to get the baby up, the baby falls down again, and either you don't notice or you say, that baby's going to drown no matter what I do. Now you're liable. You made a chess move, okay? There's theory behind that. One of them is if you're going to try to save somebody, some other passersby might say, oh, he's got it handled. And so the baby lost the opportunity to be saved by somebody else. It's like a car accident, right? You are on the highway and you see this big smash up and nobody's around. You might intervene, but if you see a bunch of people there, then you might say, it's all handled. Those are the distinctions. I don't know the answer to that case. Okay, it's going to be up for debate.
Mm-hmm. Another question, where was it? Where'd it go? Okay, yes, Darina asked about this being investigated, about a surgeon who was dancing and rapping in the operating room. I think she was an OBGYN, I think.
OBGYN.
And some patients did not do well. What are your thoughts on that?
So, I think we should throw it out there. Does anybody think, so those are the facts that we know of. There's a surgeon in the OR, this OBGYN surgeon. She's dancing to music. She's even dancing with the patient. There's a whole bunch of them. I think they're online, right, Joe?
Yes, they are. Yeah.
So they're online, and somebody suffers harm. They die. If we have no other facts, I think it's very debatable. Remember those 4 elements. Standard of care, probably not to dance in the OR like that. We all sing, we all know what's within acceptable domains. You know, if your surgeon all of a sudden goes and starts banging his head against the wall, a little bit outside of what the standard would be.
That helps many of them.
Yeah. Well, no, we banged the perfusionist's head against the wall. But anyway, so the standard of care, probably one could debate and say that wasn't met. She should have had more seriousness in the OR. So you might say she breached that. And the patient did suffer damages. But what about causation? Can you draw a line? Now, there may be more information that we don't know about. Now, let's say she was dancing and did not notice the blood pressure dropped. Those are the kind of things that link the causal chain. But without that, if you don't have all four elements, you can't prove your case. So even though, I mean, she could have been doing worse stuff. She could have been exposing herself. But you don't have causation?
Yeah.
Is there a story behind this? No.
I mean, have you seen her? I hope not. That would have been tragic.
I know. Anyway, that is the importance. It's not important that you just prove one of those things. It's got to be all four. Go ahead.
How important are rock-solid protocols that are accepted by the hospital, the perfusion department, and the surgeons? Can they help protect you in certain instances?
Yes. It's interesting. Some hospitals don't have ECMO. You are a surgeon there. You have a patient on the table in cardiogenic shock post-pump. Hospitals made a decision economically that all they're going to have is balloon pumps. You don't have any pump capability of transport. You can't even leave the operating room because all of your equipment is geared towards cardiopulmonary bypass, open system, right? If the patient dies and they decide to sue you in the hospital, who thinks that the hospital, so the surgeon I don't think you could say is liable, right? Because he doesn't have that within his control. But who thinks the hospital should be liable?
No.
Okay, you do. Who thinks they shouldn't?
They shouldn't be liable. There's no requirement.
Right, so there's no requirement. That is, and just like the government, if the government doesn't want to pay for a procedure, even though it may save someone's life, these are all decisions that are made, we call it politically. Okay, the hospital has made a decision based on scarcity of what it can offer. And the hospital has easy, right? We only do 50 hearts a year. I can't afford this kind of stuff. So more likely than not, the hospital is not going to be responsible. But you then can create more gray scenarios of decisions. Let's say the hospital does have ECMO. But the surgeon says, you know, a patient is 85. This cardiogenic shock post-pump patient is probably, let's say 99% not likely to survive no matter what I do. So I decide to let that patient die on the table. Is the surgeon liable? Has the pump technology, meaning, could the surgeon be, would you think the surgeon is negligent?
No.
Anyone? No. Okay? And that would be correct, but you can start making it grayer, younger. At what point are you being negligent? What is the standard of care?
Well, okay, good.
Go ahead.
Dave Peterson. What does he go by? I forgot.
Getting dehydrated.
Dave Peterson, Seeking His Spirit in Denver. He wants to know, for example, it could take up to 30 minutes or 60 minutes to get someone to a hospital where there's care being provided. If they'll say, for example, the patient's on ECMO, and to get them there to intervene or to deal with an issue. So is there a time limit on being able to provide that ordinary care? In other words, or does it become an issue of, does the ordinary care have to do with the proximity of where you are versus the time it takes to provide it?
All those things come into play, and that's why the standard of care is situational. That's why it requires experts to explain. But you can see in a lot of these situations, and let's say it was a perfusion case, it would be a battle of the experts. All right? One says yes, one says no. We all feel horribly if we're in a hospital that can't offer any kind of mechanical support on a patient who can't be weaned from bypass. Right? Could be a 30-year-old.
Well, if you have them on pump, you can leave them on pump. I mean, technically, you
Yes,
can do that.
but it then becomes what the end game is. There's no, very hard to transfer a patient to another facility with a traditional cardiopulmonary bypass pump.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? And that's the question. Yes, you can recover somebody on bypass, but boy, is that problematic. It's one thing for a couple of hours in the OR.
Yeah, but you can switch it out. You can take any traditional bypass circuit. I mean, at least I think so. Anybody disagrees with me? And as long as you have another circuit for like another procedure, you can take that apart with all the various accoutrements and essentially minimize it. All you're using is the pump attached to the heart. Many times you can actually take those off and put them on a cart. So it just depends. You can make it work. It's not as simple. It's not as seamless.
Okay,
it's not as
that's
easy.
a good point. Good point. Would everyone here, would that be within the standard of care for a minimally competent perfusionist? Would you all know how to do that, what Joe's talking about it, without ever reading up on it? You're in a case, you all know?
I mean, everybody raise their hand, please. I mean, I know we all know how to do that.
Okay.
What I'm talking about, it's fairly common.
Okay.
I mean, yeah.
So here
Stephanie
now
taught me.
is where you face perhaps a difference of opinion. And then it comes down to, well, is this something that can be recovered in a couple of days or not? Is this irreversible? Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point, but there's another question. What about, how many people here operate within a private practice type of group versus working for the hospital? So, I mean, a fair enough handful. So what if you're at Hospital X and Hospital X doesn't want to pay for the ECMO service system, whatever it may be, and we have them in Hospital Y and Hospital Z, and somebody at that hospital, the hospital doesn't have the ECMO circuit, needs it, and we go get it from another hospital and bring it to that hospital, and something happens on the way, there's a problem with it, whatever it may be. I mean, just take what scenario I gave you and just make it bad in whatever way you want to.
So now you've gone and made your duty deeper. Mm-hmm. You've initiated something else.
So I'm increasing my or whomever's risk.
Responsibility, right. Now, I want to tell you all, I should have said this, I'm not a lawyer. I'm giving you, from my experience, what I've seen, what I know about the law, and for someone who's looked at cases, I can tell you things can get pretty gray. Or something that you think is a slam dunk, all of a sudden you find out the hospital settled, slam dunk in your favor. And now the hospital decides to settle because they don't want any public knowledge about it, right? Because once a case goes to trial, there's a record. There are powerful, powerful incentives for hospitals to settle. And you don't have a say in it. People may pretend you have a say, they might ask your opinion, but ultimately those decisions aren't made by you. And I don't know if this happens with, is perfusion a field where if you've committed malpractice, it shows up somewhere?
Yes.
Where does it show up? Is there a national practice?
Yes. Yes, we have a
database?
There's a database.
Okay. So now all of a sudden, you're on a database, and the decision is taken out of your hand. That's part of the problem when the hospital is responsible.
And that depends if you're privately insured or you are insured under the hospital's umbrella as an employee. There is a distinction.
Okay. Explain that to me. That's very good.
Yeah, if you're employed, well, I can't really explain much of it to you, except that if you're employed by the hospital, you're under their umbrella, and you're not in that database.
So that's the same
It's
thing as
only-
I've told you with the state hospital
Yes.
and the surgeon.
Yes, only
It's
if you
interesting.
are privately insured.
So you can see there's an issue with fairness as well to some. But these are very interesting cases. And knowing a little bit about the law is really helpful because it helps you when you talk to the attorneys. So let's say you're involved in an incident. Maybe it's a surgeon that did something. You want to think in the terms of what I just told you when it comes to you. You want to protect yourself. Did you have a certain duty? Did you breach that duty? Did that breach cause the harm to the patient? All right? That's how you protect yourself, because if you don't know and you start to answer questions off the top of your head, you can get yourself into a lot of trouble and cause more grief for you than is fair. All right?
Well, I have a question for you. Does anybody here do a pre-op consult of the patient that's a perfusionist? Anybody here do that? You do? Okay. So one, if the patient doesn't know even who we are, then if something goes wrong, even if it ultimately is our fault, but the patient believed that we were essentially all operating under the guise, responsibility, auspices, whatever word you want to use, of the surgeon, then does that have any bearing on any of this?
Yes, it does. Both for the surgeon and the hospital. Okay, so number one, if the patient knows nothing about you, you can still be liable, right? You did something bad in the OR, but the patient doesn't even know what a perfusionist does. Second, liability can sometimes be split up, and it depends on the state. One of the questions asked is, to the patient, do you appear as your own entity, or do you work under the auspices of the hospital? To the patient, are you under control of the hospital? And this works for every level, not just perfusionists. For instance, nurses, bedside nurses. I think most patients, and I think you would agree, would think that that person works for the hospital, even if they're independent. We're not talking about traveling. To the patient, that person works for the hospital, and therefore the hospital can be held vicariously liable if other things are present too, okay? And that's one of the questions, and it depends on state law, whether it's important or not. But yes, that is an important consideration. A big question is, what would it look like to the patient? That's in terms of who has responsibility. If a hospital argues, let's say you're a contracting perfusionist, okay? You work for a group, your group has a contract with the hospital where you're an independent contractor. You don't work for the hospital. You do something that causes the patient harm. The question then comes up, does the hospital have liability? There are several things that are gone through. One question is, what would a patient think? Two, what degree of control does the hospital have over your practice? To what degree does someone from the hospital look over your records? To what degree does the hospital have the ability to control your pay? All of those are considered indicators of control and would be looked at, not to determine whether or not you're at fault. You are at fault. That's a given in this scenario. It's whether the hospital's on the hook or whether it's coming out of your own malpractice provider. Or if you only have $1 million coverage and the damages go beyond $1 million, can the patients or patient's family go after the hospital?
That's another really good point, because there is a hospital in Houston that the only place that requires my group to carry an additional So we have a 1-3 policy, 1 million, 3 million occurrence on the one, and an additional 5 million umbrella policy per occurrence. And that policy is kick-ass expensive.
Yes, and that is contractual.
Yes.
Okay?
But they do that for what you just
For this
mentioned.
very reason. That's the reason.
Right.
So that somebody, if you did, now, if the hospital shares responsibility, if, you know, your job was to tell the hospital what tubing packs to order, and so, you know, a lot of you guys do your own ordering and checking. Maybe someone else in the chain is supposed to make sure that the supplies are up to date. And it's out of date and something happens. Now the defendant can argue not only did, you know, who knows what happened, we're just making this up, but the perfusionist is fault. Now the hospital has liability regardless of that contract. Because now we're talking about duty of care and what the hospital does and the degree of control they have over you. But yeah, the contracts that hospitals do try to shift all the risk to the independent entities. Mm-hmm. However, what's happened in medicine, right? A lot of the cardiac surgeons now work for hospitals, as do many of the cardiologists. And that's probably a trend that's going to continue. Now, a lot of the cases are just not, the hospital is insuring you. They cover the malpractice insurance. And it all goes to the hospital. Some are not insured. Some are just self-insured and have a big fund that they provide for the purpose. Nonetheless, you as a surgeon, you're going to be, if you're named, you're on the database, you know, no matter what. But the hospital assumes a lot of the liability. That's where it all comes. But because they assume the liability, they also have control over things like the decision to settle. Mm-hmm. You know.
Mm-hmm. 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 And any other questions from the floor? Before we, oh, good.
I have a little scenario. I do a lot of auditing of charts, intra-op records. And what I am finding out of unbelievable, inaccurate, and inattention to detail with electronic records. This example was a patient that came up from the ER emergently with a gunshot wound to the abdomen. Patient comes in, you know, they've got lines, they've got the stuff is done, patient had an exploratory lap, and then it sort of falls off. And the patient is discharged with O2 and a mask to the morgue. There was no mention of time of death.
They were discharged with
what this boiled down to, it was pre-charting.
Wait, say that one more time. I got to make sure I heard what you said.
The patient was, what was an example of pre-charting. And so it was defaults that are in the electronic record. Mm-hmm. Patients, majority of the time, are extubated in the OR and they go to PACU with O2 and a mask.
Okay.
So this patient it was discharged with O2 and a mask, and the disposition of where it went to was the morgue.
Okay.
And, you know, and it drives me crazy when I see unbelievable, incorrect detail. Mm-hmm. And I keep telling people, I said, you've got a little box down there that says free text. I said, anytime you do anything that is out of the ordinary, put it in there, because if you have to go to court 3 years from now, you're going to remember it.
Yeah, that's a huge problem. The electronic medical record can be the best thing and the worst thing for us. And really, it's up to you to make the most of it and the optimal use, knowing how you are and what you do. So I'll give you an example of what I do. I review surgical op notes all the time, and it's ridiculous. For an operation as complicated, not as complicated, maybe as routine as a cabbage, but the op note says basically, I came, I saw, I conquered, you know, and without much detail. And then what I have done now is I have cabbage and valve templates. And I have f-stops. Some hospitals F2, some are F3. That brings me to places where things would be distinct for each case. And it makes me go through each one and enter, you know, either manually or choice. Now, if I'm someone who made it up and I'm lazy, I could go through and just My baseline op note says I took the left mammary down, then I took the right mammary, someone else took the radial. I do a lot of multi-arterial. Now, if I didn't take the right and I forgot to delete it, that section from the op note, it looks very sloppy. Not only would it look bad for you should you get sued, but you can even be brought up on Medicare fraud. Exactly. Right? Even if the patient just gets $5, even if Medicare pays $5 more for the additional graft or taken down, that's where you can get into easily get into a lot of trouble. Now, a lot of times those mistakes in the medical record, at trial, the attorney will bring them up, and at the very least, it makes you look incredibly sloppy. It may not prove your negligence. It may not even tie in. But if you have an op note, I've literally read op notes that said, circa res case, the temperature was brought down to 19 degrees, we operated, we fixed, done. Well, it so happened that in this case, because they were using antegrade cerebral perfusion, they went to 24 degrees. Patient had a stroke afterwards. Everything may have been done right, but now you said 19 degrees in the op report. It may be reasonable practice, which it is, to go to 24 if you're using antegrade cerebral, but all of a sudden questions are raised about what you did, what you lied about, and it's very hard to defend something, say, oh, I was in a rush. That makes it look even worse, right? So I think that's an incredibly important point. And the same thing with my consents. After I learned a little bit about the law, I now pre-make my consents in many respects. I list all the complications that I've discussed with the patient. And I discuss them with the patient. It's in the consent form because the other area of tort law that involves medical providers is consent, informed consent. And that's completely separate from negligence, the straight form of negligence. So you've got to be careful. Nowadays, everything, and the electronic record is going to be terrible for people. In fact, some hospitals have removed some functionality, right? The typical resident note copies the same note every day. I've had patients that I've done cabbages on that the primary care resident says, going to have cabbage next week. And I'm not talking about a rarity. This is very common because it's just too easy. People are harried. They want to get through things. They've lined things up so it's easier for themselves, but they create a lot of problem. There's a lot of stuff that goes on. You know very well that not every bad thing ends up in a court case, but when they do make it through, and when you're negligent, all this stuff looks horrible. Looks horrible. I'll just ask you another. Who does ECMO here? Good, a good bulk proportion. Are you all familiar with either the Avalon or the PA catheter that was discussed the other day for doing VV? Okay. And I'm not asking you because you're not going to be the judge of the standard of care. A surgeon would be. But think about this. Surgeon puts in a VV cannula. Either of a couple of things have happened. One, cannulated the carotid artery. Two, perforated the right ventricle. Let's just talk about those two things. Would it make a difference what imaging modality they used that could have made this preventable?
Sure.
Okay. I'll give you my practice. It's not the standard of care, but it's up for debate. If I put something like the Avalon cannula on every case, I use ultrasound to find the vessel if it's closed. I use both fluoro and echo to position the cannula. And I'll tell you why. Early in the use of this cannula, The cannula, I had a cardiac anesthesiologist who was very confident in his echo abilities and says, you don't need fluoro. Okay? I'm scratching my head. I'm saying, no. But you know what? I'm being Mr. Nice Guy today. Caught me on a good day. So I do it with just echo. And I perforate the right ventricle. Anybody have any idea why that would happen with just echo? Joe?
The wire, why, what, because you didn't see that the wire wasn't straight down, it had gone into the ventricle.
Good. So, it used to be thought that if you saw the wire in the IVC, you were good. Just pass the cannula and you're in. If you didn't use imaging, you would not know that the wire was coiled in the RV. And you're passing that cannula down and it's not going into the IVC. And the reason being is that echo is a planar modality, even when there's 3D reconstruction. Fluoro is cumulative, right? Fluoro will tell you, it'll show you the whole thing. Now, fluoro is not really good at telling you if your inflow is right across the tricuspid valve. That's why you need echo as well. But having told you that, I will also tell you that many people believe that the standard of care is one or the other, not using both. And you probably, where you are, you see surgeons doing one or the other. I use all for that very reason. And there's other reports in the literature of that happening. At some point, it may be now, it may be in the future, all those modalities may be the standard of care. However, some hospitals, high volume centers, have now made special units, not the OR, where they're putting their ECMO in. And they can't really get fluoro in those units. What if something happens bad there? Are you negligent for not using the appropriate imaging modality? These are all really serious questions, consequential questions, which the answer isn't always clear. Okay? And that's why the world needs, and I'm speaking to you directly, world needs good expert perfusionist witnesses. Okay? Ones who understand the evidence that's required and can speak about the standard of care and know the distinctions. A lot of people, and I'm not pointing out perfusionists, the same holds true for cardiac surgery. A lot of things are said as an expert witness that are completely false. And they're being said in front of a jury, and the jury might believe the person who's misrepresenting. So think about those things. I'm going to leave you with those thoughts because it's very important, no matter which side you do. You know, sometimes the patient has a really good claim and the perfusionist really screwed up. And they need someone brave enough to look at the record and say, listen, this was definitely negligence. And that's important. Most of us don't like that side. But the poor patient and their family. There are some cases of really clear negligence. If they can't find anybody as an expert witness, there's no case. Family loses their 50-year-old breadwinner. Nobody else works. You know, I can make the situation like that, but think about that, because it's really important. As long as you're honest, look at the facts and judge them from the standard of care that you would expect. That's the most important thing. Anything else?
We're ready for a drawing.
Thank you all. I'm drawing. Okay. Okay.
Bring it up. You want to do it? Well, yeah, take it out.
Oh, I thought you was right.
Well,
You want me to draw?
You can hold it.
Ah.
Everybody got your cards, your tickets out? Tickets out. Dig it in there. Come on. Give me a name, a number.
All right. 858630. That's it. I'm doing the number. You can't say that it's yours?
No.
Screw it.
You're just supposed to say Joe.
Oh, the name's on the back? Joe. That's not right. That ain't right. That ain't right. You can't do that. This, I'm making sure. That's really not right. That's really not Joe.
This is the real winner.
Okay. So am I doing it by the number?
I don't know, unless they signed it.
All right.
Do either one.
Joe.
Hey! If I do two in a row, do I win? Can I win?
No.
Can I win?
Are all of those Joe?
No. No, we didn't. When we're doing it as a joke. Here it is.
I'll throw all the other Joes.
This is
All right.
real. This is real. All right, here it is.
All right. Number. This is real. 224-0701. Do you have to be here?
We got a winner.
All right.
We have to confirm it. Come on up on stage. Come on up on stage.
Is your name Joe by any chance? What is this for? The hotel?
The condo in Vancouver.
Summer or winter? Or they can do whatever they want?
It's gonna be beautiful. Beautiful 2-bedroom. It's just really nice. It's a match.
No, 00. No, just kidding. 01. Joe is never going to have me do this again.
Can you do me a favor, please? Get his name, contact information, and all that, and we'll make the reservation. Thank you. Listen. Oh, and closing remarks. Thanks. Love y'all. Peace out.